Well, it's my honor to continue on with our program this evening, so if I could have your attention, please, because this is a very special part of the evening, not only for me, but for the entire community. This is my chance to introduce and honor a legend in this community, a man who has given so much back, philanthropically, obviously, and obviously through his business acumen for many, many years. Before I welcome him in person, I direct your attention to the screen so we can get to know him just a little bit better on video.
In my opinion, Bill's very essence is that of a pioneer.
I call Bill inspirational because he is an inspiration on how someone should live their life as a corporate leader, as a community leader, as an employer, and as a friend.
Bill's a visionary. There's no question in my mind, someplace in his own personal experiences and the struggles that he'd been through in other fashions, I think he began to develop in his own mind the culture that he thought we all ought to have in our country on staying well.
William Kishler Coors, known by many as Bill or Uncle Bill, was born in Colorado on August 11, 1916, in the shadow of the Coors Brewing Company. He is the grandson of Adolph Coors, who founded the brewery in 1873. As a young man, he began working for the family business.
I think the best lesson I learned is be conformist. Do what you're supposed to do. Do what is expected of you. I was expected by my parents and my grandparents to excel in everything I did. You couldn't be good enough, but it was easy to be bad enough.
At 99 years old, it's hard to imagine a young Bill Coors as someone who suffered serious health problems. The pressures of the family business, the expectations of his father, and the weight of his future began to take a serious toll on Bill's health. Doctors didn't have the slightest clue what was wrong and had no idea how to help, despite the fact they were seeing the same symptoms in numerous patients. Bill had done his part. He took the battery of tests, but conventional medicine offered no prescription that could help him.
They give me every test they knew about, and then I remember walking into the physician's office for my final review. I was thinking, I don't want to go on living like this. I'll have to find out myself what's wrong. So that launched me in what I called a 25-year career of the non-conventional medicine.
For Bill, one of those non-conventional alternatives included mind-body medicine. Bill was suffering from stress, and early studies on mind-body medicine techniques showed promise for reducing stress. Bill began to support Dr. Benson's evidence-based research in the area of mind-body medicine.
He saw eventually that health and well-being would be like a three-legged stool. And mind-body medicine, integrative medicine, came in that third leg.
I always felt very, very strongly that a person had to take full responsibility for the people that worked for them.
Believing that good health involves both mental and physical exercise, Bill would establish the Coors Wellness Center, which set the benchmark for employee wellness programs across the country.
Why does a brewery have a wellness program? And I think Bill's answer would have been about the same, because people make beer, and keeping them healthy also helps the company.
Bill knew this was good for his employees, but what did it do for the company's bottom line? Dr. James Tierberg from the Lundquist College of Business at the University of Oregon agreed to study whether the Coors Wellness Program made financial sense for the company.
We did two studies, one in 1998 and one in 1995. And both of these studies showed that there were not only benefits to the health of the employees at Coors, but also financial benefits to the company as a whole.
And when the figures came out and we showed them to Bill, Bill still said, I don't want this in the media, because I do not want to have an employee feel we're doing this just to save money.
I think the average person needs more guidance. And that is the purpose of the Wellness Center, teach people how to live. What I'm finding so interesting about our Wellness Center is the number, the dedication of our retirees. They're the youngest bunch of old people I've ever seen in my life. I'm very proud of this.
Bill is a prototype for me. I'm 80 years old, and Bill's teaching me how to be 100.
It was Bill and his brother Joe who created the Adolph Coors Foundation in 1975. And today, the foundation continues to advance Bill's vision of integrative health by funding evidence-based research and demonstration projects nationwide.
Well, if there had been no Bill Coors, I'm not sure that the company would be around, and I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have a foundation. So his fingerprints are all over everything we are today, both as a business, as a family, and as a foundation. He's going to continue to do great things, by the way. He's only 99.
When you speak about Bill Coors, to me, Bill has been, I think, almost camouflaged from the standpoint of his contribution because he just doesn't run around seeking it.
He's always lived his life to make life and the world better for others. Bill genuinely cares about people, and he cares about them regardless of their station in life.
During life, you do a lot of things that you shouldn't have done, regret the fact that you did them, but there's always tomorrow to correct them. The will to live, you don't give up.
Bill Coors will be 100 years old this August, and unknown to many, he has had a profound impact on our health and well-being in the United States. Bill served his family, his employees, and his country. But most important, his passion and pioneering spirit have taught people how to live.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bill Coors. You know, I don't know if we really appreciate what an honor it is to have Bill here tonight. And I was just sharing a story with him 23 or 4 years ago. One of my very first stories was assigned to go out to the Coors plant. And I walked into this room and they said, well, there's Bill Coors, Mr. Coors. And I said, well, hello, Mr. Coors. And he said, oh, call me Uncle Bill. And I thought I was part of the family. It didn't quite work out that way, but I'm still so honored to be here. Bill, thank you for all you do, and it is the reason we have this event here tonight, and he's very humble. He wouldn't really admit to this fully, but he is the reason why we're having this event here today. So thank you once again. Thank you, Bill. It is now my honor to introduce our two speakers for the rest of this evening, and I'll have them come up as I'm introducing them. Dr. Weil is an American medical doctor, teacher, and author. He is founder, professor, and director of the Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona. He received a BA in botany and MD from Harvard Medical School. I won't say what year, but it was a little before my time. How are you, doctor? Good to see you. He's widely known for establishing the field of integrative medicine. Please welcome Dr. Andrew Weil. Dana Perino is a former White House press secretary, political commentator, New York Times #1 best-selling author, and co-host of Fox's The Five, which, by the way, you're winning your time slot right now. Congratulations. Yeah, she says. She is an amazing person, too. The White House's first female Republican press secretary, one of the most widely respected members of President Bush's senior cabinet as well. Please welcome them both to the stage. Thank you for being here. Don't forget, we will be having a Q&A a little bit, and I think one of you has an iPad. Okay, very good. So don't forget to use the Two Shoe app /health to get your questions up here electronically, and Dana will take care of that. And I'll turn it over to you all. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. I am honored to be back in Colorado. I grew up here, born in Wyoming, but raised here in Colorado. Mr. Coors, it is an honor to be here in your presence, and thank you so much for all you've done and for this event tonight. It was 18 years ago that I was on a flight, my first flight from DIA. I almost missed the flight because, in case you hadn't noticed, the airport's kind of far away. And I misjudged it a little bit, but I ended up sitting next to a guy on an airplane, and he was British, and he didn't have a wedding ring on, and we talked, and we fell in love, and my husband, Peter McMahon, is here. And so it's always fun to come back to Denver, and my mom, Jan, is here as well, so thank you so much. Denver is growing so much. I almost didn't recognize where I was today, but I did see in Business Insider this morning that the #1 city for young people to move to is Denver, and that's for good reason. So, the other thing that my husband told me, that he reminded me, was that when we met, I was 25, he was 43, a little bit of an age difference. He looks great, though. That my husband said, don't you remember when we met that you were such a huge fan of Dr. Andrew Weil? And you would tell me, Dr. Andrew Weil said this, and he said that, and you were such a big fan. And so tonight, to be able to sit with the great Dr. Andrew Weil is a huge honor for me. So let's start with a round of applause for him.
Thank you. Thank you.
In the time that we have, there's so much, we do want you to send in your questions. I've got the iPad here so that I can try to figure out whichever the most important question that you want answered. I have a few, and I thought we would just start off by asking for your description and definition of integrative medicine. Like, how would you describe it to the layperson?
Well, the short answer is it's the intelligent combination of conventional medicine and alternative medicine, but really it's much more than that. Integrative medicine is a system of medicine that focuses on the natural healing potential of the human organism, that looks at patients as more than just physical bodies. You know, we're also mental, emotional beings and spiritual entities and community members. It looks at all aspects of lifestyle to understand health and illness, and really emphasizes lifestyle medicine. It stresses the importance of the doctor-patient relationship, and it makes use of all available therapies wherever they come from that can help people, as long as they aren't going to cause harm and show reasonable evidence for efficacy.
And so, in your scope of work and over the time span that you've been working, do you feel like integrative medicine is now becoming either more accepted or more common, and is it being taught more in the schools?
It is certainly becoming more mainstream. There's a group called the Consortium of Academic Health Centers for Integrative Medicine. More than a third of the nation's medical schools now belong to this, and this is involvement. Actually, I think we're near half of the schools, and this is involvement at the level of deans and chancellors. There is the National Institute of Medicine held a conference on integrative medicine. Oxford University Press publishes a series under my name of an integrative medicine library for clinicians. And we have now, I think 15 volumes out in different specialty fields for doctors. You can't pick up a journal today without reference to integrative medicine. Our center at the University of Arizona has graduated over 1,300 physicians from very intensive trainings in this field. We have a condensed curriculum that's a required accredited part of residency training, and we now have, I think, almost 60 residencies around the country that have adopted this curriculum in family medicine, internal medicine, and other specialties. So yes, I would say this is making great progress.
Is that partly generational, and that the younger people are more
not
interested?
entirely. I think, if you look around the world at where integrative medicine has advanced most, we are far in the lead. And I think it's because we are farther over the cliff in terms of the deconstruction of our healthcare system. I think that initially, when Bill Coors became interested in mind-body medicine and was supporting Herb Benson's work at Harvard, this was largely a consumer-driven movement. But I think now it's propelled forward by economic considerations. Our healthcare system is in tatters, and it's going to get worse. And I think it's the great promise of integrative medicine is that it can lower healthcare costs and maintain or improve outcomes. I think you can do that in two ways. One is by its emphasis on lifestyle medicine and real prevention and health promotion, and secondly, by bringing into the mainstream treatments that aren't dependent on expensive technology. And I think it's that, as I say, if you look around the world, it's the countries in which national healthcare systems are going down the tubes that integrative medicine is really gaining ground.
So what would you say is missing in conventional, or can I say traditional, medicine that is pushing people to seek alternatives?
Do I have all night to answer that? First of all, there still is essentially no education about nutrition in conventional medical training. That's one of the most glaring deficiencies. The total instruction I got in 4 years at Harvard Medical School was 30 minutes, which were grudgingly allowed to a dietitian at one hospital I worked at in Boston. Wow. That hasn't changed that much since I've been out of medical school. There is essentially no instruction about mind-body interactions, which has been a passion of the Coors Foundation. Mind-body medicine, I think, holds enormous promise. It's applicable to almost every kind of disease condition, and the methods based on it are very cost-effective, time-effective, and yet they're very underutilized in medicine because doctors aren't trained in it. There's very little training about the strengths and weaknesses of other systems of medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, which have their applications, and doctors should know the strengths and weaknesses of these and when it's appropriate to refer patients to them. There's very little instruction about spirituality in medicine. There's very little instruction about end-of-life care and death and dying, which is becoming a more and more pressing need as baby boomers are approaching their senior years. So there are broad areas that are simply left out of conventional medical training that I and my colleagues feel are very relevant to keeping people healthy and to treating common disease conditions.
This might be a good time then to bring up the delicious meal that we had, and you brought up nutrition and the focus on that. I live in New York City now, and I would go to Equinox Fitness Center, and there is a big push from Equinox from a business standpoint about regenerative health, but a push on nutrition as well. And maybe you could talk about the philosophy of the meal that we had tonight and how you worked with, and all of your conferences. This is unlike any meal you have at a normal big function like this, and it was delicious.
Well, first I want to acknowledge my good friend and colleague Rebecca Katz, who was responsible for this meal. She is a cookbook author and chef. We work together, and she does meals for our conferences. We have always felt that it's very important that there be a consistency between the messages being put out at a conference of this sort and the food that's served at them. And in the distant past, that was absolutely not true. So we're very happy to do that, and we try to have the main nutritional philosophy that I advocate is an anti-inflammatory diet, and Rebecca, the meal that you were served tonight conforms to those general principles.
All right, and of course, if you're here in Denver and 12 other locations around the country, your restaurant,
True Food Kitchen, yeah.
I'm trying to talk him into opening one in Columbus Circle, New York. I think it would be great.
It would be great.
We would be there. Because I think people learn best by storytelling or examples, I wondered if you could mention a couple of common ailments or illnesses or diseases that are happening, let's just focus on America, and how you see integrative medicine tackling those in the best way.
Well, let me just mention two that come to mind. Okay. One is gastroesophageal reflux disease.
I hear more and more people talk about it.
When I was growing up, people got heartburn.
Right.
And they treated it by taking Tums, which is a perfectly safe antacid. Now you go in and complain of heartburn symptoms, you're diagnosed with gastroesophageal reflux and almost immediately put on one of these acid suppressive drugs, the proton pump inhibitors or PPIs. These drugs are not safe drugs. They were never intended for long-term use. It is not good to suppress acid production in the stomach. That's your main defense against infection coming in by the oral route. These drugs, there are many, many side effects. The latest one is increased risk of dementia from taking them. And a real problem with them is that once you take them for any length of time, you can't get off them because the when you suppress a function like that in the body pushes back. So if you suppress acid production, the body is constantly trying to put out more acid. And if you try to stop the drug, there's an outpouring of acid that makes the symptoms worse. So it is very, very tough to get people off these once you start them. And many cases of gastric distress can be managed by changing diet, the size of meals, the timing of meals, eliminating common irritants, alcohol, coffee, decaf coffee. There are a number of natural remedies that make the lining of the stomach more resistant to acid. Stress has a role in acid production in the stomach and susceptibility of tissue. And often in a standard medical encounter, none of these questions are even asked, and just reflexively a prescription is given for a PPI. So that's, an example of, I think, of sort of sloppy, lazy, conventional medicine, where integrative medicine has a great deal to offer. The other one I'll mention is ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, now epidemic in this country. The statistics on the diagnosis of this in kids, adults too, but especially in kids, is really alarming. And this was a very rare condition when I was in medical school. So, I'm always suspicious of faddish diseases,
yes.
Where they come from. And but in many cases, the complexity of inattention and hyperactivity is not paid attention to at all. All the possible factors at home or in school, different learning styles of kids, and just instead people are automatically put on stimulant drugs, which have their own set of problems. And I worry a lot about the widespread drugging of our kids. By the way, I would expand that to psychiatric drugs in general in kids today. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs, antipsychotic drugs. We are doing a vast experiment with our nation's children. We have no idea what the long-term effects of these medications are on the developing brain. So those are just some examples of areas where I think, conventional medicine is really not doing its job well, and where integrative medicine has much to offer.
Could I ask you about one other thing in that regard, in a specific, and if you don't have an answer,
sure.
That's fine, but it was surprising to me. So I cover the presidential election, and way back in August, I pitched a story about the first question every presidential candidate, and at that point I think there were 22 total, Republicans and Democrats, the first question they were asked at every town hall meeting in New Hampshire was not about the economy, jobs, national security, healthcare. It was about opiates and
really?
Yes, it was the first question they all got. And subsequently, they all came up with some sort of a plan to come up with something to do something. But I'm curious if you would add opiate prescription.
I would. In fact, I'm just finished completing a book now called Mind Your Meds, and it's about our over-medicated society and the commonest drugs that I think are overprescribed or misprescribed, and what people should know about them, what the risks are, and what alternatives there are. And one of the chapters is on medications for chronic pain. And I think there is now, first of all, the technical term now is opioids rather than opiates. Opioid drugs are highly effective for the treatment of pain, especially for acute pain. But I think there is now a realization that when pain becomes chronic, this is a fundamentally different animal. It often becomes disconnected from the initial trigger, and other areas of the brain become involved, and there are a lot of what are called comorbidities that go along with this, which include things like depression, cognitive deficit, sleep disturbances. And this forms a very stubborn, difficult pattern to treat. And it is very clear that if you rely on opioids alone to manage chronic pain, you get into a lot of trouble. So they may still have a role in the management of chronic pain, but it's got to be done. Treatment for this has to be individualized, it has to be a team approach, and it has to address all of these other factors, which includes lifestyle, many lifestyle issues. I think various forms of psychotherapy can be useful, stress reduction through yoga, all of this. And in this context, and I think there is now generally a recognition that chronic pain has to be treated integratively. In fact, the state of Oregon recently mandated an integrative chronic pain initiative requiring that doctors treat chronic pain with an integrative approach and not rely on opioids alone.
And would you say that that type of approach is not only more effective for the individual, but also could help lead to lower costs.
No question. And in fact, the cost to society of opioid dependence and addiction are horrific.
Yes.
And as you know, well, I'm sure, especially in the New England states,
yes.
It has become, so widespread. So there are devastating effects on society. And I think this is an area in which we're being forced to adopt an integrative approach to a problem.
And in your experience, do you see insurance companies more willing to cover costs of alternative medicine?
I think that is slowly happening, but the problem is that, as dysfunctional as the healthcare system is at the moment, it generates rivers of money, and that money flows into very few pockets, among them the pockets of the big insurers and the pharmaceutical companies and the manufacturers of medical devices. And in general, those interests don't want anything to change. They're very happy with business as usual. Mm-hmm. But I think that increasing demand from patients and increasing economic constraints are going to force companies to begin reimbursing for this.
As I said, I have this handy dandy iPad, and it has some of your questions. So if you don't mind, I will throw you some from the audience. Let's see. They ask if you could comment on the role of functional medicine in the integrative natural medicine movement.
Sure. Functional medicine is a system that's quite robust today, and it has broad overlap with integrative medicine. I have some concerns about it. I think functional medicine focuses too much on biochemical mechanisms that may not have any clinical relevance. It relies a lot on unvalidated medical tests, and it prescribes, I think, way too many supplements as methods of treatment. It's a very appealing system to practitioners because they can make money from the tests and from the sales of supplements. Okay. I've seen some very good results from functional medicine. I think, although this is changing now, it has generally been deficient in the area of mind-body medicine and spirituality in medicine, where I think integrative medicine is really strong. And I think it also has been deficient in lifestyle areas.
So what if you're somebody like me? I belong to a thing called One Medical Group, which is like a concierge medicine thing, and you belong to it, and then you're guaranteed a same-day thing. I don't really have a relationship with my primary care physician because thankfully I'm healthy enough that I go once a year if I need something, and I usually don't. I'm not on any prescriptions. But so for somebody like me or anybody else here or family members that they would want to give advice to, how do you go about finding a provider who will actually provide this type of suggestion?
Well, first of all, the University of Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine has a registry of our graduates. So if you go to our website, which is azcim.org, there's a Find a Practitioner link, and you can find practitioners in various specialties in your area. And we have now helped create a credentialing body for integrative medicine through the American Board of Physician Specialties. So there will now be a credentialing process, and people that have had standardized training in integrative medicine can have that credential, because up to now anyone can just hang out a shingle saying they're practicing integratively, and they may not have had standardized training. And also some groups, in fact One Medical being one of them,
they do a lot of
they are interested in, and we've been in discussions with them about trying to create integrative primary care clinics.
Yes, in fact I get their emails.
Good.
Oh, that's good. Here's another one from the audience. Let's see, wait, where was the mental health one? The question was, and now I can't find, here it is. When are we going to see more inclusion of the importance of mental health in relation to medical conditions?
Well, I mean, you can't separate mind and body. That's the whole point of mind-body medicine. And some years ago, I think it must be now 8 years ago or so, our center organized a first national conference on integrative mental health. It was in Phoenix, and we had planned for an audience of about 200, and we had to close registration at about 700 because that was all the venue could accommodate, and if we'd had a bigger venue, it could have sold out whatever space we had. The hunger for this among mental health professionals was just enormous. And I think there's a great need for integrative mental health. One of our initiatives is to develop residency training in psychiatry, to have our integrative medical curriculum in that. I think there's a tremendous need for that. Unfortunately, psychiatry has become totally under the spell of the biomedical model, which sees all distortions of emotions and thinking as being due to chemical imbalances in the brain treatable by drugs. And so it's a very narrow focus, and I think there's great room for much more creative ways of both preventing emotional illness, maximizing emotional wellness. I wrote a book several years ago called Spontaneous Happiness, which is about this, so I'd recommend that as a resource.
What if you're a parent and you're worried about your child's mental health, and you hear stories from people, moms and dads, who say, nobody would listen to me, nobody would help me.
Right.
What sort, I mean, I know there's
Well,
a registry.
unfortunately, what usually happens is that the kid is put on drugs right away.
Right.
And that may not be the best approach, because there may be so many other factors that are responsible that could be adjusted. You know, ideally you find an integrative mental health professional, but there aren't very many of them around. We're trying to train them as fast as we can.
Let me ask another question. This is a good one, and I think that he's had to depart, but let's ask that how has Bill Coors been an inspiration to you?
Well, I met him several years ago and had lunch with him at his home, and was very impressed with his mental vitality and also his really long devotion to this field, and particularly the area of mind-body medicine. And the Coors Foundation has sponsored a research project at our clinic in Phoenix, Arizona, comparing outcomes of patients receiving integrative treatment with patients getting conventional care. That's been terrific. So I think he is, first of all, personal inspiration. If you didn't get to hear him talk today, but his lucidity is very striking, and his philosophy in this area. And I think the dedication, his personal dedication, and the dedication of the Coors Foundation to this area has been wonderful.
Your answer to this next question might be similar to the one about acid reflux, but I think because there's so many people in here, including someone I know very well, what do you think of statins and their side effects, and do you think there is a place for them at all?
I do think there is a place for them. Statins are extremely effective at one thing, at lowering bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and that is a good thing to do. However, I have worries about statins. Yes, of course, there are side effects and there are problems with them. I think in general they are relatively safe. But first of all, it's important to note that half of people who have first heart attacks have normal cholesterol.
Really?
Yes, that's a shocking piece of information. So cholesterol is not the whole story. And lowering LDL cholesterol is not the only thing you'd like to do. You'd also like to be able to raise HDL cholesterol, good cholesterol. We don't have anything to do that. You'd like to be able to change the size of cholesterol particles from small, dense ones to light, fluffy ones, which are less risky. So what worries me is that when doctors put a patient on a statin, they tend to think they've discharged their responsibility to that patient. Yeah. And they haven't addressed any of the other complex factors that enter into heart health, which includes mental health as well. We know that in men, a tendency to rage is associated with a higher risk of heart attack, for example. So you'd want to be able to teach people how to contain anger and how to relax. You'd want to teach people about dietary changes. But all of this is lost once a patient is put on the statin. I can't tell you how many cardiologists and doctors in general I have heard say in these exact words that they think statins should be put in the water supply. I do not think statins should be put in the water supply. I think they should be used judiciously. They have their appropriate uses. There are certain risks to be aware of, but they have a narrow range of action, and they just don't address the complexity of factors that are involved in heart health.
And so if somebody has been on them for many years, do you recommend they try to come off?
Well, first of all, there is a very good natural remedy that works like statins. It's a product called red yeast rice. And in fact, it's a natural source of statin-like drugs that's been used traditionally in Chinese medicine. It has a much lower incidence of side effects. So the first thing I would suggest is that patients see if red yeast rice can maintain cholesterol in the same range that they're getting with this pharmaceutical statin.
That would be a good outcome.
Yeah.
Okay, another question from the audience is, chiropractics, they say, has not been mentioned at all today, and how helpful do you think it is in maintaining healthy organ function?
Well, chiropractic, the history of chiropractic is that it developed as a technique of spinal manipulation to address spinal problems, and I think for musculoskeletal problems it can be very effective. I think, are some problems with chiropractic. One is a tendency to immediately try to sign up patients for long packages of treatment. That bothers me somewhat, and I think also there are claims made that spinal adjustment can affect, organ function in many distant areas for which we don't really have good evidence. But we use chiropractors in our clinic and on our faculty, and I think they can be very useful resources and should be part of integrative teams of care.
All right, another one. This is an interesting question. How can we get today's youth to become proactive in your practices and programs?
Well, I have long tried to argue that we should really be doing health education in a much different way, and this should be K to 12 and on up. I think the basic principles of healthy living are not that complicated. The health education that I got growing up was laughable. It was information that was presented in a very moralistic way. You should do this, don't do this, without giving you any sense of why. I'd love to see creative teaching about health, preventive health education. One of the suggestions that I've made is using interactive video games as part of this process. I can think of a lot of ways that we could do this. I think I'm a great believer in prevention. I'm an educator. I really believe in the value of education. And my experience is that if you explain to people concepts in ways that they can connect with their own experience, they will run with them.
I'm curious about your own personal story because you went to Harvard Medical School.
Yeah.
I know several people who went to Harvard Medical School. I'm sure you probably visit, but when you go back today, how different is it from when you were there? Or is it not?
Well, there's a lot more women.
That's good.
When I was, my medical school class of 125 had, I think, 12 women in it, and they were given a very hard time. One of the former dean of the University of Arizona College of Medicine, Jim Dolan, a cardiologist, who was the man who gave the green light to starting our integrative medicine program back in the early 1990s. I remember him telling a story that he was at the University of Massachusetts. He was dean at the University of Massachusetts, and he said when they first started having female residents in cardiology, and there was a lot of ripples about that he was making rounds one morning and with a cardiac patient who was lying in the bed, and the whole team was around them. And at the end, he noticed that the woman resident had been holding the hand of the patient. Oh. And he said he knew in that moment that medicine was going to change.
That's a good change.
Yeah, good change.
That actually gets to a question that somebody had here about providing benefits for caregivers to palliative care patients as their continued stress level unfortunately determines a quick drug fix for their loved ones, if that makes sense.
I don't quite understand what
I think what they're saying is what was the best way to help people who might be taking care of their loved ones to try to convince them that the quick fix is not necessarily going to be the best way.
Well, I think that our whole way of dealing with end of life has a long way to go. The growth of the hospice movement in this country is one of the good things that's happened. But I think many doctors still see death as the enemy, and that it's their business to stave it off as long as possible. Right. And I think there are, a lot of the baby boomers are expressing their feelings very strongly that they don't want to die in the way that they've seen their parents die. Mm-hmm. They don't want heroic efforts made. They don't necessarily want to die in hospitals if they can. I think this involves a massive rethinking of our whole cultural view of death and dying, and of which medical, our healthcare professionals are part.
I like to look at generational issues, and I think often I'm a Generation X person, and I look at a lot of my friends who are many of them are trying to help their parents who are aging, but they also have children that are trying to get through college and trying to avoid all of the potential pitfalls that comes with growing up, and also being squeezed financially and trying to make good personal decisions about their own health care.
That's tough. You know, one of the, I often say this to people that are caught in those situations. There's a biological metaphor that I think is very powerful, and that is that the first thing that the heart does with its oxygenated blood that it receives from the lungs is to pump it to itself through the coronary arteries. If it didn't do that, it would be unable to serve the rest of the body. So taking care of yourself is not being selfish necessarily, and especially if you're in that situation where you're being called on to take care of others. That it's very important to take care of yourself first so that you can do your best with others.
One of our sponsors, obviously, is Americans for Prosperity. They have a wonderful grassroots organization all across the country. And one of my favorite things is on AFP days when they go out and do their grassroots work, and they'll tweet me usually, and I make them do silly things to get a retweet. So they do funny pictures and things like that. But one of the questions from the audience is, I think, goes to some of the work that they do, which is, how can I get the information out there to the layperson about integrative medicine, especially urban families and lower income households?
Well, several things. One is that our center is now starting for the first time educational efforts directed at the general public. You know, up to now we've trained health professionals, but we now are developing online modules for the general public. So that's one effort we're doing. Another is that we have given scholarships for our fellowship for physicians that want to go into working in underserved areas. So we're doing what we can to get that out there.
And any advice for them when they are out there trying to talk about making your own personal decisions and your health care? Any advice for them? Well,
you know, one of the complaints I often hear is that if you just look at diet, that people think that eating healthy diet means healthy diets are expensive. And that you have to shop in Whole Foods. And that's not necessarily the case. You know, that what's most expensive when you go into supermarkets, it's meat and animal protein. And the healthiest diets often restrict animal protein. Beans are a wonderful food. They're cheap. Grains are a wonderful food. They're cheap. So there are ways, you know, there is a problem that I think that we should all be working for, which is that to get our government to stop subsidizing commodity crops and instead to subsidize fruits and vegetables, which are out of the, you know, so that's something that we could all be working for.
Here's a question from the audience that I am curious about as well. Any thoughts on efforts in mind-body medicine in dealing with PTSD?
Yes, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder has become a huge problem because of the number of returning veterans that suffer from it. So that's really forced us to think about it a lot. And we haven't had good treatments for it. And this is an area in which I think we want to experiment, be creative, and again, it's made to order for integrative medicine. One of the therapies that I've recommended, and I've tried to get some research done on this, is laughter therapy, which you may have read about.
That.
This was the invention of an Indian doctor in Bombay who found that if you, I mean, his great discovery was that if you get people together in groups and have them simulate laughter, it rapidly becomes real, meaning that it recruits the involuntary nervous system and eyes tear and things like that. At any rate, there's an instant antidepressant effect with laughter. And that's a completely low-risk, cost-effective intervention. Just an example of one of the things that could be tried, because it's very clear that we don't, you know, conventional approaches with drugs are not the answer here.
I heard this week, someone was telling me that some doctors are now prescribing Ambien to veterans that have PTSD so that they can forget things.
That does not seem to me to be
not
the
a good
right
idea.
I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Especially since Ambien and related drugs, that's another chapter in my book.
I think I need to read it.
Yeah, the benzodiazepines, I think these are some of the worst drugs out there. They interfere with memory and thought and very quickly form very stubborn dependence and addiction that's actually harder to break than opiate addiction. Wow. And people are put on these things thoughtlessly. It's Ativan and Valium and that whole family of drugs.
This might put you on the spot, but here you are on the spot.
Okay.
Okay, and you've probably been asked this before. A question from the audience is, what do you think has caused the increase in ADHD, Asperger's, and sensory processing disorder, etc.?
I don't know. I mean, I can only guess. First of all, I think we are all victims of information overload in our society today. You must know this well. But this is a drastic change that human beings have never before been subjected to all the effects of cell phones and email and information coming at us from every channel. I think that's really affecting brains in not a good way. I think it leads to shorter attention span. I think it increases anxiety. I think there's a lot of things there. So that's one thing to be looked at. Another possibility that's very interesting is that this is also related to changes in the microbiome, in our gut flora, because we are finding that the organisms that we have inside us really determine a lot of aspects of our health, including emotional and mental health. And it is not impossible that the human microbiome in our population has changed drastically in the past few decades. And this is a result of antibiotic use, of the rising rate of cesarean delivery, of decline in breastfeeding, and of increasing consumption of industrialized food. So the organisms we have within us are very different from what our recent ancestors had. And it looks as if that affects things like concentration, maybe a factor in ADHD, it may be a factor in autism, maybe a factor in these other conditions that you mentioned.
No one in this room is without having been affected by or even suffering from and maybe surviving cancer. And one of the questions from the audience is, what do you see emerging in the alternative healthcare realm in the treatment and hopefully the reversal of cancer?
Well, the big, the big exciting frontier these days is immunotherapy. And rapid advances are being made there. I think that it's not in the too distant future that radiation therapy and chemotherapy will be obsolete.
Really?
And that we will look back on this era and not really believe what we did. I think surgery will always have its place, but I think that immunotherapy that is recruiting the immune system to get on the job it should be doing and defeat cancer cells, we're making great strides there. We're also, I think, when I was in medical school, I was taught that there was very little of cancer was environmentally related, and I think that has changed. That view has changed enormously. And the more that we can identify environmental causes of cancer, the better position we are in to teach people ways of protecting themselves to avoid it in the first place.
There was one person in the audience that I know today who's, actually two people, whose fathers were misdiagnosed, or they missed the diagnosis of prostate cancer.
Uh-huh.
And so then when it's finally diagnosed, it's at stage 4. And then, is there anything that we can be looking for as
yes, well, I think
wives or moms or daughters?
Yes, I would say, first of all, there is, I think, very strong epidemiological evidence for the preventive effects of soy foods on hormonally driven cancers, on breast cancer in women and on prostate cancer in men. And I think the earlier in life that whole soy foods are introduced in the diet on a regular basis, the greater protection you get. Whole soy foods is edamame, tofu, soy nuts, soy milk, tempeh. It's not fake hot dogs where the first ingredient is isolated soy protein or soy supplements or functional foods spiked with isoflavones. And it's regular, moderate consumption of these. And it's very clear that in female children, the earlier in life that these are introduced, the greater protection. It influences the development of breast tissue up to puberty. And I think in men, there's equivalent protection for prostate cancer.
I'm going to combine a couple of the questions here because they're of the same. They're curious about your opinion about gluten-free diets, paleo or grain-free diets, and what your recommendations.
Those are big questions.
Yeah. There are books about this that you've written.
Right, and we actually have two very good presentations in our nutrition conference in the next few days on those subjects. Gluten is mysterious. There is why wheat, which has sustained human life for thousands of years, should suddenly become a problem for people. We don't fully know. A couple possibilities that have been suggested are that that bread today is very different from what bread was in the past. That in the past, it was a slow, natural fermentation that changed the chemistry of bread. And with the introduction of instant yeast, that this produces chemically a very different bread. Another possibility, again, is this is a microbiome effect. We're seeing this particularly in North America. I always like to point out to people that in China, I've been to China a number of times recently, in any Chinese restaurant, you can get gluten as a protein. You can get sweet and sour gluten, gluten with black bean sauce. There's no gluten sensitivity in China. They've never heard of it.
Huh.
So, why? So something's happened in this population. And as I said, I think our microbiome has changed drastically, and that might correlate with rises in allergy, with rises in autoimmunity, and gluten sensitivity might be one part of that. In terms of you asked about the paleo diet.
Paleo diet was one, yep.
I think, the essential philosophy of the paleo diet is to avoid refined, processed, and manufactured food, which I'm strongly in agreement with.
Right.
I think that's, what's really doing us in. I think in its extreme forms, the paleo diet is much too restrictive. And, for example, telling people not to eat beans ever, that seems silly to me. I think beans are very good foods. They combine slow-digesting carbohydrates, protein, fiber, vitamins, minerals. Same with grains. I don't think the problem is grains. It's what we've done with grains, that we have made an immense number of foods out of pulverized grains, flour, and those impact blood sugar in a way very different from truly whole grains or cracked grains. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a misunderstanding there of some of these foods.
Now, this is not a personal question, even though it could have been, because I'm curious, and I know that you do a lot of traveling. The question from the audience was, can you talk about how you live a healthy lifestyle while being busy and especially while traveling? It's hard.
Well, it's hard. There's no question about that. And especially, one of the things that are hardest for me are maintaining my healthy eating habits on the road.
Yep.
Especially if you're stuck in an airport. And why we put up with the airport food we have, I don't know. I think that's slowly changing.
Slowly, yeah.
Slowly,
so.
yeah. And the other is maintaining physical activity habits. And at home I swim every day, and I don't get to do that when I'm on the road. So, I try to walk, I try to go up more stairs, but those two things are tough. I think it's hard, and all I can say is you cope the best you can.
You and I have something in common, and you think that this is a very healthy thing, that we both are dog owners, and we love our dogs. And I wondered if you could, I'm sure a lot of people in this room have pets as well, and you think that this is a healthy way to live.
Absolutely. First of all, I can't imagine life without dogs, and there's a tremendous amount of research on the health benefits of having pets or companion animals. I suppose you can get these benefits from having a lizard, but I think it is much...
There was somebody tried to go on an airplane the other day with an alligator.
Really?
They said it was a comfort alligator. It was not giving the other passengers much comfort, though.
But listen, here's a piece of research you may not have come across, and I think this is terrific. It's quite recent. Dogs are unique among animals in that they hold our gaze.
Yes.
All other animals interpret looking into the eye as a threat, or it's an aggressive thing. Dogs have evolved the ability to hold our gaze. Well, it turns out when dogs and we are looking at each other, there is oxytocin release.
Yes, I did read
did you
this
see
in the
that?
New York Times,
in
yes.
the brains of both dogs and humans. And oxytocin is the feel-good hormone that's associated with social bonding.
Yes, and the recommendation in the article was to try to look at your dog in the eyes as often as you can during the day.
And as long as
it's
you
a
can.
mutual benefit. So Jasper and I stare at each other for hours on end. And it's not weird at all.
No, in fact, I often find it's my dogs that initiate that. I'll be doing something and I suddenly look around and they're, staring at me, so I will stare back.
I get that in the morning. I don't have children, but I kind of know what it's like when Jasper comes to the side of the bed and he knows he can get up, but he won't get up until he's given permission. And he just stares at me.
That's
and
a good
stares
thing.
And stares, and
That's a good
thankfully he
thing.
doesn't say he's going to get sick. We're out of time, so I had one more question for you. What would be your best recommendation and wish for the people gathered here tonight in terms of their health in the next year?
Well, the best recommendation I can give you is to learn how to breathe, because I
that's a
am
good one.
convinced that proper breathing is a master key to good health. And I've put out lots of information there. You find this on my website or in my books. I mean, just a very simple thing is to breathe deeply, slowly, quietly, and regularly whenever you think about it. And
So like when I'm on set with Juan Williams.
Absolutely. But there's a specific breath that I teach called the 4-7-8 breath. We have wallet cards for this. I'll give it to you. It'll be very useful to you.
This has been one of your books.
Yes.
I remember this.
But try this. You should. I mean, it takes all of 30
You
seconds.
breathe in for 4, you
breathe
hold
in
for
for 4,
7,
hold for 7, out for 8,
out
and
for
do
8.
4 breaths.
Yep.
And this is very, very useful. It'll be great for you.
I'm going to try this tomorrow night on the 5. So if I don't speak for a little while, you know I'm having a moment.
Good.
I learned a lot. I hope you all did too. Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Weil.
Good. Thanks.
Dana Perino and Dr. Weil, thank you very much. Good to see you. Dr. Weil, thank you, an honor. Thanks to all of you as well. I have a special gift for at least one of you at each of your tables, so bear with me. This is the very first Pioneers in Health. Have you all enjoyed it? So our thanks to the Adolph Coors Foundation. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all. Americans for Prosperity, thank you very much. I hope this is the first of many to come, because I think this has been very inspiring and wonderful. Great gratitude to all of you. I hope you take what you learned today in a very short period of time and take it into action as you move forward. One of you at your table got a little coupon or a little piece of paper that says you're a winner. What you won is the bucket of beers in the middle of the table. Yeah, isn't that awesome? However, let me just caution you, if you are driving home tonight, make sure you put that bucket of beer in the trunk, all right? That way we won't have to call me and get you out of jail. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy your rest of your evening, and good night.